Another example of a policy that we would write would be a custom conflict of interest policy. In most organizations, they're asked on their 990s on an annual basis whether they have one in place. And so usually organizations will pull one down off the internet and vote in place. The problem is that, the ones that you pull down off the internet are extremely restrictive. And what I've found in the nonprofit space, especially in the rural states, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, is that we have conflicts of interest all over the place.
Welcome to the Feast Over Famine podcast. On this podcast, we're navigating the tension that we find where mission and profit collide. We're talking to CEOs, founders, executive directors, impact investors, and all of what we've identified as the global ecosystem of the social enterprise, business for transformation, business as mission landscape. We're talking to them about the obstacles they face, the strategic challenges they've been through, how they're funded, how they were started, and everything that's happened in between. We are trying to share their story in a way that's impactful to help us all to grow the social enterprise space for the better. Enjoy this week's episode with your host, Ryan Mahaffey.
All right, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Feast Over Famine podcast. Super stoked for today's episode with Nick Morgan. Nick has been on the podcast before. If you will, we'll put in the show notes like a link to the past episode and stuff, but we'll talk about his new project and the stuff he's doing. And yeah, super stoked for this episode overall and for you guys to hear it. So Nick, welcome to the podcast, man, or welcome back.
Thanks. It's nice to be back.
Yeah, dude. It's funny, I feel like when we recorded the last one, we had recently met, and then now I feel like we're buds. We still haven't hung out. We were supposed to hang out, and then you decided to go be a good human and, adopt and had to bail on us. So hopefully next year.
I think the last episode was probably a pre-text message relationship. So there might have been a level of formality that doesn't exist on this episode.
Oh yeah, that's gone now. And if we would have actually stayed with you this summer and your family, that would have totally been gone. Right?
then you wouldn't believe anything I say.
Oh man, totally. I actually really like that as a qualifier, like the pre-text message relationship. Right. I'm going to start using that. That'll be like a real milestone in friendships with people.
Yeah. You say, we're friends, but not text friends.
Yeah. I don't just like kick you a picture message of something for fun because I think you'll enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah. There's some people I don't send memes to. So
yeah, that's the next level. It's like text level, and then meme level is probably the end of it.
Yeah. We'll see if we get there. Right? But it is good to be here. And thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, totally. Well, and really, we're going to go on a lot of rabbit trails, I'm sure, because we always do. And hopefully we can hold ourselves back from too much mountain bike talk in the mix, because I have a tendency to go there often, but
I can go there.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, that's why it took us 35 minutes of this scheduled time to actually hit record on the podcast. Right. But man, what really intrigued me to do an episode, one, I just, value your expertise and you bring a unique angle to things, but you were telling me you started Idaho Nonprofit Law, and that's a new project. You're not new to law, but that's a new project. And when you started explaining your heart behind that is pretty cool. So why don't you kind of open us up, like share with me, what the past year or so has looked like and what shifts have happened and what's landed you to where you're at, and we can dissect it a little more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you're right. Law is obviously not a new project for me or a new emphasis. For the last 10 years, I've been representing clients primarily doing international work. So representing a lot of charitable organizations and their international structuring. And then that began to become more complex when we started B4T law, which the emphasis was the collaboration or connection between nonprofit and for-profit operations. And so, that, kind of brand of what I do with law was focused upon things that you would recognize, Ryan, but like joint venture agreements between a nonprofit and a for-profit, commercial co-ventures. What if a nonprofit wants to start a brand and sell things? What if a nonprofit wants to set up an investment arm and charitably have a charitable beneficiary, but a profitable company? Yep. So, we were working on those kind of issues with that brand B4T, and it got more and more complex, and we love doing the complex stuff, but the startup game with nonprofits is strong right now, and there weren't enough players that were really helping, these high growth, high potential nonprofits start out on the right foot. Yeah, that was especially true in my home state of Idaho. And, it was just one of those things where nature abhors a vacuum, and I abhor a vacuum also. And so I launched Idaho Nonprofit Law, primarily focused upon helping nonprofits start well. And so we can talk a little bit about like a few of the packages that we offer, but the nonprofit formation package is pretty much, our bread and butter.
Yeah. And I mean, that plays into a lot of what we do too, because like there's a lot of projects that have come to us where we say, hey, they're kind of down the foot already, or they're already raising capital. And I'm like, pump the brakes, because this is illegal. This is an SEC violation. You can't do that. Those kinds of things. And I'm not a securities lawyer in any sense, but we know those things. And so sometimes it's, it's the whole, like, do you tear down different pieces and reconstruct, or do you just start over again? And unfortunately for you and I, in a sense, like, it's rare that you kind of catch the project on the front end where you say, hey, we can build the foundation, then build upon it. It's pretty rare. And at the same time, like, the more you put that out there that you're doing that and you have that startup package, that becomes a norm. Like, I think that's just going to set projects up for success. Like, a lot of time and money gets spent on doing things the wrong way and then having to redo them. And so my hope is that it fixes that. And another thought I had is the cost side. Like, did you guys with B4T Law experience? I mean, I even know I sent you a few projects, and it just like, it's the chicken before the egg. Like, when the capital isn't there, to hire an attorney, the rate that is equitable and fair, like, usually they don't have that cash flow until they get that. And you can't put your neck out and say, well, if you happen to raise the capital, then we'll just take a percentage. Like, I know in the VC world, that's a thing, but that's not going to really work in this world. So how much did that kind of struggle play into it, the B4T Law side? Yeah. So we're definitely not in the financing game.
So I mean, it's a real issue. And on the Idaho nonprofit side, especially, as well as B4T Law, with B4T Law, there's often for-profit players at the table. And so we've been able to, with joint representation agreements or by representing the for-profit, we've been able to, get those contracts and get some stuff done. And that's been really great. But you're exactly right, especially when we're talking about a startup nonprofit. They're at a decision point. And if all of my income was dependent upon high quality, high touch nonprofit formation packages, I would absolutely go under, because there's not that many who elect to do that. There are, it has to be a volume business if you're doing formation stuff in order to do well. But that's not the direction that we've traveled at Idaho Nonprofit Law. We do the high touch, high quality formation packages that require quite a bit of foresight for the nonprofit. It requires that decision to say, okay, I could do this cheaper. I could try to do it on my own. I can fix all the mistakes once we're up and running. Or I could invest early and set off on the right foot and have a firm foundation. Yeah. And so we are relying upon those clients that make that election, that say, it's going to take a little bit more time up front to structure in the right way. It's going to take a little bit more money up front. But I intend to grow this thing. It's, we're not going to be the nonprofit that's filing the 990, the quick, the 990 easy, the quick and, under 50 grand filing for our entire life cycle. We're the rapid growth. We have a plan to take over the world. It's going to be complicated. And the reality is once we're up and running with our programs, we're not going to want to restructure. We're not going to go want to fix a bunch of mistakes or introduce new policies that have to be, retroactively applied or undo the way that we're currently practicing. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It's a chicken and egg scenario, but we're looking for those people that want to build their foundation on the rock, not the sand.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And sometimes it's like the famine mentality of, oh, we're a nonprofit, there's no way we can afford that. We'll have to kind of wait and move forward. And sometimes that's fair. Like I think some nonprofits and some ministry minded folks, like their heart is towards something that just is not generating a lot of donate. It's just very simple. And you're saying like, great, that's probably not the option for you guys to help. That's needed. But yeah, like building that foundation properly is pretty specific. So before we go into some of that stuff, talk to me about Idaho. So you're called Idaho Nonprofit Law.
Yeah.
You're obviously in Idaho is where you live and are from, and you spent your life, a lot of your life there and care about it. Talk to me about the nonprofit landscape in Idaho. I mean, and what makes it unique,
Yeah. So there is some unique things here. So about 7,500 registered charities in the state of Idaho. So by, that's out of 1.5 million nationally. So very, very small. Yep. But, and then you also have kind of this nascent situation in which there are like less than 50, nonprofits in the state of Idaho that have more than $1 million of operation budget. Wow. So it's very, very, I would say small and new, but Idaho is a, incredible rapid growth state. We have a couple of our metros that are, on the top 5, if not the top 3 list of fastest growing metropolitan areas in the country. There's this exodus out of the cities to come into the rural areas that you're seeing with the COVID shakeup right now and a bunch of other things where, our natural beauty is attracting a whole bunch of new talent, a whole bunch of new people, new population. And so again, nature abhors a vacuum. There wasn't a ton of legal operators focusing upon high quality nonprofit issues because we're just at the front of the wave. But so I've been working with some great partners like the Idaho Nonprofit Center and Council, and a couple other folks that are focused on this. Now, Idaho Nonprofit Law is a branding issue, but it's kind of a misnomer because the reality is with my partnership network and according, based upon like the revenue department's 230 circulation and stuff, like we can represent nonprofits all over the country. Right. So we are, we're here to build, high quality nonprofits, for, any client. We'd be happy to talk to a Colorado client. But Idaho is the place that I feel called right now to invest. Especially as this nonprofit environment, this sector kind of is just at that front wave of its development. Let's put a bunch of resources in front of it and invest early so that 50 years from now, we can be a national leader in quality. Yeah.
Well, and like when you see rapid growth in metropolitan areas like that and cities, like what follows it is obviously brokenness, right? You add more people, you add more challenges, like that's just going to happen, so take domestic violence, for example. Like if you grow your population by 100%, you're also probably statistically growing your domestic violence by 100%. If, certain areas plateau, you get, obviously, some sort of gentrification happening in those cities, which causes segregation, which like challenges the housing crisis in those areas. You've got more people going out and, enjoying that natural beauty that Idaho has. Now you have different organizations that need to, build trail networks and those kinds of things. So like that boom that happens, there's like almost a lag. And then the need for charitable, impact-minded people to come in and do that also grows just as a nature of all of us humans kind of breaking the system, right? So it makes sense that that'll happen.
You're exactly right. Population grows, need grows. And so every, city planner is talking about how to get in front of the population boom. How do we put in infrastructure that will make this a great place to live in the future, not just today?
But most of the time that infrastructure, like that city planning is meant for the middle class and above. It's like, how do we get roads that function for this? Well, what about the people that don't have a car? As public transportation, right? I feel like that happened in Denver, like coming from Chicago to Denver in the time that Denver was booming, partially because like marijuana was legalized and all that kind of stuff happened. I moved here 2014 for the first time, 2013, 2014. And I moved here from Chicago and I was like, man, people here were saying, wow, they're investing so much in public transportation. Like the public transportation here sucks. Like it's horrible compared to Chicago. Right. And it still isn't. So I don't feel like the way we plan for population growth, like urban development, is necessarily focused on those that are going to be most in need. I feel like it's focused on how to make the economy grow. And then it's an afterthought normally to say, oops, like we kind of missed out on that. Like, what are we going to do? And then it's not really the government that comes up with those things. It's individual nonprofit charities and things, or social enterprises that go in and do that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the actual, definition of what qualifies something as a charity. And one of the defining factors is decreasing the reliance upon government services.
Yeah.
And so, I guess my whole point is the whole thing requires foresight. We're at the head of the wave. Yeah. Idaho is going to be huge in the future. The needs are going to be huge. Let's make sure that the way we're starting the nonprofits today that are going to affect those needs in the future is our best foot forward, the highest quality we can do. And so we're here to provide that. And that, again, that doesn't exclude any other, amazing client that we'd love to serve. It's just that we focused in terms of branding upon being in Idaho. That's where we are residing. That's where our heart is. Yeah. And we needed to be here.
Yeah, totally. Which is awesome. All right. So then you talk about like this setting the foundation startup piece, and maybe the best way to talk about that is what are some of the common misses? Like when you think of like, hey, the startup package, or like what nonprofits starting need to think about, or even just one that exists that probably didn't do this well, like what are some of the biggest kind of blind spots that you see that you guys are trying to solve for? Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So let me approach that. Just kind of telling a little bit about what the formation package is, and then why we have these component parts. Yeah. And I think that'll address your question. So the corporate formation package it follows what any attorney would do, helping you through this situation at the beginning. So, the nonprofit trajectory is, you start a state corporation, typically a nonprofit corporation in your state. And then you have your initial meetings, and then you go to make application for tax recognition of tax exemption with the federal government, with the IRS. And then that either automatically, or there may be additional next steps to get your state tax exemptions in place. And then based upon your industry type, you look in your operations, you see, what the next steps are to make sure that, everything's in place for you to operate effectively in compliance with the laws of the state and the land. So that's what we do. That's what any good attorney would do. In addition, we help you to do a bunch of things to put you off on the best foot. So we have as part of our corporate formation package, we do training with all the officers and the board for each position, what the unique requirements of those positions are. We do a minutes template that says this is exactly what you're going to need to maintain to be in compliance in your minute book. We actually help co-lead the initial meeting of the corporation so that they get the rhythm of what this looks like to bring a motion, to vote on a motion, and that we make sure that every step of that initial corporate meeting is taken care of, because those are missed steps in a lot of initial corporate meetings to act, So it's just little things, but it makes a huge difference. Like the corporate resolution to establish bank accounts, like nobody does that in their first meeting. And then someone goes into a bank They don't have the right resolution in place. They come back to their board, they call an additional meeting, waste everyone's time, and it throws everyone off mission because, man, you get fatigue for
doing
well,
and I was going to ask you that, like, how much of this stuff is like what's the risk? Because some of that stuff you're saying is like board governance and how to like run a nonprofit well and do these things. Not a huge amount of nonprofits go super sideways where it's like now all of a sudden they're getting sued and all this kind of crazy stuff. And they've got to like, look at all that. And I guess maybe like the Red Cross, like some big United Ways, those kinds of ones have a little more of a target, but probably the ones that are going to be starting up and getting rolling aren't there yet. They want that for the future. You talked a little bit about like the fatigue risk, like, if you don't do things well, it's just going to cause hiccups and it's going to throw things off. But I guess paint the picture of like how much this kind of stuff matters. Obviously it matters. Some of it's checking a box of like, this is how we do things. And you're talking to someone with me who's like, I'm not the biggest fan of nonprofit boards personally, because 9 out of 10 that I see are super ineffective. Half the people on the board want to hear themselves talk more. They're so 50,000 foot view that they bring up things that actually derail the conversation more than it actually is executionable. And I find executive directors that aren't actually pushing their organization forward and fundraising and doing the things they need to do because they're so busy messing with the board. Now, that doesn't mean I think boards are bad. They're just very ineffective. And I know a lot of them that have these pieces that you're talking about. And those pieces, like, although they're there and they're like, hey, they know how to motion for a vote or those kinds of things, that doesn't actually change the effectiveness of it. Right. And so talk to me about, like, I guess the risk that's there and then how to mitigate those pieces.
Yeah. Okay. So far we've talked about is corporate formalities, and there's 3 risks at play here. The first is the fatigue issues. Okay. So if you're spending all your time chasing little, problem rabbits that get out in your field, then you're not on mission. The second is the maintenance of corporate formalities is incredibly important, because if you don't maintain them, it'll overcome like your D&O insurance. And there's every potential that in a litigation situation that the corporate veil that protects the officers and board of the organization can be pierced to get to the individual liabilities of people involved with this charity. So that's the major one for maintenance of corporate formalities, to make sure that that shield exists so none of the individuals can be reached personally for their liabilities.
Which people think pretty heavily about when forming a for-profit business, but not often as a nonprofit. For some reason, as a nonprofit, like, oh, the risks aren't there. No one's going to sue me. I'm doing good for the world.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. So, those are the major things on the corporate formalities. But then what we do in addition to, establishing all the protocols, the rhythm, the corporate formalities, the training of responsibilities, is we create a custom policy bank. And this is where we get to the major risks. So we create a custom conflicts of interest statement. We create custom policies on child protection. If you're a church or dealing with children in any way, we create custom facility use policies. And these are the things that organizations typically don't address until a much later state of their maturity cycle. But they take charities offline or distract or major problems all the time early. It doesn't matter. Like, if you're going to get sued for a slip and fall, or you're going to get sued for denying someone to come into your facility because they don't meet your, at least in your mind, the charitable criteria that you're trying to address. That'll happen whether you're early or late, it doesn't matter. So we want to get people set off on the right foot in that regard.
Yeah. Well, and I almost look at it as, if you're sitting there listening to this or you're a nonprofit, like, you don't know what you don't know. And so it's like having someone come in and say, here's a list of 100 potential risks for you guys. How do we mitigate those ones? And it might not be that you mitigate all 100. It might be like, yeah, the chances of this third happening are pretty slim. Let's not waste our time there. But like, this third are pretty likely. And I think as we get a more polarized society, like, those things are going to happen more. When you think about changes in gender and just ways that, especially in the church context, because wherever you hold your convictions, I think there's religious, and it not even like the Christian church, but any religious organization, wherever they hold their theological beliefs, if that puts them at end with anywhere that someone lands on some issue in society, to hold that, like it's just, I feel like we're already seeing it, but over the next 5-10 years, it's going to become more and more of like a really tough thing that they should be prepared to have themselves protected.
I mean, you're exactly right that it's getting more combative. And that's why, I mean, what church, early stage church is going to say, let's spend a bunch of time on our facility use policy. But I make them spend time on that because that church says, all right, this weekend, there's a car show. We're going to offer the car show in our parking lot. Okay, great. Awesome way to get people, familiarized, introduce yourself to the community.
Maybe even an earned income stream because they can rent it out to the car show. Yeah.
So then the next week, there's a bingo event that applies to become part of your thing. Say, oh man, we don't want to do that. All right, maybe we'll let it in because I know the guy. Okay, you let the bingo thing in. The next week, someone else is here knocking on your door that absolutely you don't want anything to do with. You want to distance yourself because it's a cause that is antithetical to the reason you exist as a religious charity. Well, guess what? You've already established a process of saying yes, almost indiscriminately to applicants for facility use. Now you're going to say, no, it's going to be a problem. If you had a facility use policy that outlined exactly what you're willing to consider and exactly what was out of bounds, and you're not making ad hoc decisions based upon the applicant, then there's no possibility of litigation. I mean, it's so remote, the possibilities of litigation. Not only are you not going to have that trouble because you can just hand a policy out instead of having a battle, but you're not going to get in trouble for denying someone that's antithetical to your existence.
Yeah, totally. And we've got organizations in our network, like clients of ours that are faced with that. But how much of that side do you think, like, without like pigeonholing yourself as a niche, like how much is the religious side of the nonprofit law, like a specialty for you guys? Like when you look at those 7,500 in Idaho, is that a big part where like you kind of, I guess, how specific is that? Like if I'm a religious affiliated organization or a church or some nonprofit like that, how much more do I need to be caring about this kind of thing and finding an expert that gets that than your traditional nonprofit that maybe doesn't?
Well, yeah. And I'd say the biggest issue is that churches do not understand themselves as charities. And so that's the first recognition is that, there's special treatment of churches under the law. Churches don't actually need to file a 1023 application with the IRS for recognition of tax exemption. There's an automatic assumption of tax exemption, but that doesn't mean that churches don't need to operate under the law concerning all 501c3s, or that churches shouldn't pursue 501c3 recognition. They actually should in most cases. And so that's the first issue, is that a lot of churches don't consider themselves, these rules don't seem applicable to us. They don't consider themselves part of the club, so to speak. So that's the first thing, is educating churches on who they are and what they need to comply with. So I'd say, that's something that we're very effective in. We have a long history working with religious organizations. The second are, religious liberties issues and issues of deep religious conviction that a lot of law firms don't have an understanding of and appreciation of. That's a differentiator for us because we've been representing, religious organizations, since I started in law. As a Christian myself, as someone that, wants to see Jesus glorified in all of my work and everything I do, I very, very much understand religious conviction. You need an attorney that, understands why you exist and appreciates why you exist to be advocating for you.
Yeah, it's a challenge for sure. And one you want someone kind of in your corner on.
So another big issue I was going to just mention, you were kind of asking about kind of the issues that blindside people is, another example of a policy that we would write would be a custom conflict of interest policy. In most organizations, they're asked on their 990s on an annual basis whether they have one in place. And so usually organizations will pull one down off the internet and put one in place. The problem is that, the ones that you pull down off the internet are extremely restrictive. And what I've found in the nonprofit space, especially in the rural states, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, is that we have conflicts of interest all over the place. We live in small cities. We know everybody. We know all the players. And if we're actually operating according to the letter of the conflict of interest policy that we pulled off the internet, we're in violation every time we do a deal with, my buddy at the car lot, or my buddy at the, Charity Z, or I happen to be on the board of 5 charities in my city. And so what is my fiduciary duty as a board member to one in exclusion of the other? And so we have to really think through these issues, especially for, lower population rural areas, just recognizing that there's going to be all sorts of collaboration that exists that would be violative of a standard conflict of interest policy. And so we make sure we understand the community, we understand the people on the board, we understand all the collaborative opportunities that the organization will face before we draft a conflict of interest policy.
Well, and part of the value of doing that on the front end is if you haven't built your board yet and you're kind of getting in that process, and you can say, hey, like, here's things to watch out for as you build your board. Much like for me, strategically, I see a lot of boards get built out and then like, these are not the right people to accomplish. Like when I look at leadership, like executive director's skill set and what's needed to happen and all this kind of stuff, like this board makes no sense, And so doing some of that on the front end can be good. All right, everyone, I want to take a quick break from today's episode and just share a little bit about Impact Foundation, who's got an incredibly awesome model of using impact investment, charitable dollars, and funding tons of projects all over the world right now. What if your investments could change the world? At Impact Foundation, they believe business with purpose has the power to transform society. Purpose-built for impact investing, Impact Foundation provides a streamlined way to fund businesses that seek social and spiritual transformation or make loans to charity, all while earning a financial return to grow your giving. Donors and investors have already supported more than 200 redemptive enterprises through their impact accounts. They provide needed fuel for companies that exist as a force of God's redemptive work in the world. To learn more about what they're doing in their Kingdom Impact Investing model, visit impactfoundation.org. I have two kind of questions to maybe kind of wrap us up. One is much more open-ended, might take more time. The other is easier. But before I ask that one, I know it's kind of hard to say, but can you give some parameters on cost, like appropriate-ish cost range for things like this? So, hey, if you're a nonprofit that's going to be, under, like you said earlier, like under 50 or filing the EZ form, don't worry as much about this stuff. I mean, you need to care about it, but not, if you're between 100 and 500K, you probably need to think, or you're going to be there in the next year or two, you need to think about, this price range to that price range. And it could be a range, but just to give someone listening to this, like some context of like, okay, cool. I need to probably carve that out in my pre-fundraising to launch this thing to make sure I do it right. What would you say to that?
Yeah. So you're exactly right. So there's kind of there's costs that can't be avoided, which are, your 1023 is going to be 600. Your state filings for nonprofit corporations is probably going to be 100. You're going to need a registered agent, which is $50 a year. So there's this minimal stuff. And then if you want an attorney to advise you, you got to think about the complexity of your operations and figure out, not only your size, but your complexity and how well you really want to do this thing. And so I would say if you're popping up a food bank, that's going to be open a couple of days a week. It's a volunteer run. You're going to have very, very low risk, very, very low, kind of operational requirements. Your attorney isn't going to need to know that much about you personally or your board members or all these sort of things. And so it would be in your benefit to spend $1,000 for an attorney to, look into, making sure that you apply and you're not wasting time. You're not going to get rejected, that they answer, all the questions correctly on the 1023 and file it on your behalf. And then you're going to self-manage that. You're not gonna have external auditing. You're not gonna have all these other, complexities of a larger charity.
Totally.
So by contrast, if you want to do some ambitious things, you're going to grow to a staff size of, 20. You're going to invite, the public onto a facility you own. You've incurred a ton of risk just by doing that.
Yeah.
And you're probably going to want to start thinking about, what does foresight require in terms of policy making? And a package like ours is $4,000.
Okay, cool. Yeah. No, I think it's just helpful for people to have a context like, hey, spend a couple. I mean, it's the same way for business. Like, when I first started my organization, it's like I spent a little bit of money with a lawyer, but not a lot because I didn't have a lot. And I was like, I just need some like basic documents, make sure I'm good. And then, there was a few contract points through the years, but then this year we grew a lot and I was like, wow, okay, we're doing more in the security space and that's messy. And, there's some things and we're like, yeah, this is going to be the year we spend like a good bit of money on legal to just kind of reset. And for us, we didn't need to do that a couple of years ago. So we were able to do as we grew while kind of mitigating that risk. Some organizations can, some can't, but I think it's good for people to have like kind of range in their mind of like what something might be.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you're and that's, I guess that's all I'll say on cost. And then if you're already operating and like you said, like you've brought on incremental risks or you've added on risks or grown, and didn't do a lot of this on the upfront, then we also have an assessment package. And that's tailored for every specific industry type within the nonprofit sector. But, we know what your big risks are, and we can come into your facility and spend a day with you and give you all, here's all the steps you need to take in the next 3 years, whether you engage us as an attorney or not, to help you with this. These are the things that you can do to avoid your big risks based on the way you are currently operating. Yeah. And we know how to do that very, very well for all the different industry types.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I think super helpful. So last thing I wanted to dig in a little bit with, and there's a lot of angles this can go, but basically is like, what about, our podcast is focused on navigating the tension where mission and profit collide. So social enterprise, business or transformation, those kinds of things. We've done a lot of podcasts in the past on like, how to think about investments, and you can go off the deep end there and bringing in capital versus not. We've talked with people about, profit, when to be a nonprofit versus for-profit, that. But I guess as it relates to some of these risks and the startup stuff and what we've been talking about, what would you say are some of the unique pieces to think about for someone that's looking in the social enterprise space?
Yeah, great. So the unique things are going to be how money comes in, how it's handled, when it's in, and where it goes. So if it's going anything to where it goes is the easiest, right? So if money that comes in your door funds anything other than benefiting a recognized charitable beneficiary class, then it is a complex structure that, needs a lot of attention. So that's the first thing is if the money that goes somewhere, does it go to anything other than a recognized charitable class?
Yep.
And then, the second question to ask about, are you being unique? Do you need special attention, et cetera, in your social enterprise is, what kind of collaboration do you have? If let's say you are a tax exempt organization, what kind of collaboration do you have with organizations that aren't tax exempt?
Yeah.
And if you have agreements or you're doing deals or whatever it is, if it's anything beyond a simple vendor agreement towards your operation, then that needs pretty significant attention. The charitable space is highly, highly guarded by the regulatory authorities. It needs to be crystal clean. And the IRS has the simplistic notion that for-profit is evil when it comes to charities.
Yeah.
Right. And so anytime the two collide, there needs to be a lot of special attention. So those are the easiest things to look at.
Yeah.
Does my money go anything other than my program? And second, am I collaborating on a sophisticated level with anyone that isn't a 501c3?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I love that. I think that's helpful. The way I always explain it to projects or clients is like, my job, Feast Over Famine's job, is if there's 100 questions, our job is to narrow it down to where there's only like 10 left over. And then we go to Nick. Cause for you, it's like, if someone comes to you and they're like, yeah, you know what, we haven't really thought about like what kind of, salary level I'm going to need as an ED in 3 years. And if that's going to be distributions, or do I want to pull out, like, what are we going to do with all these profits? Are we going to scale? Or are we just going to leave it in there? You know, we need a fundraise, but you know, we want an investment. It's like, well, is that equity? So when we can start to coach and answer those questions and then build a financial model that actually spits that out, then we can go to someone like you and say, okay, Nick, here's what we're doing. Here's what we're trying to do. Like, tell us what we can't do in this, just black and white. And then for the gray, messy stuff, which is the majority of it, like
how to do it.
What do we put in place to protect ourselves for that? And I think that's a great way you and I, you know, have and can continue to partner on that. But I think for projects to know too, like, try to answer, like, you know, them doing some of that hard work on the front end before contacting you is going to help you help them more. And it's going to save them money, you know. On the flip side, if they want to come to you and have you coach them on all those pieces, like you can do that, but it's like, man, is that really like using that? And I think that's a big part. And that's our hope of the podcast, right? Is to like have people thinking about these things and starting to narrow that list of 100 down to like 20 before they work with us. And we can fix those ones and come to you. So yeah, no, I think that's,
I'm excited about how the ecosystem is developing. The faith-driven investment ecosystem is going gangbusters. The social impact and social entrepreneurship ecosystem is really maturing. And then, this latest offering, Idaho Nonprofit Law, is the attempt is just in burgeoning nonprofits markets to say, let's set out on the right foot. Let's make these nonprofits as effective as possible. Let's eliminate all the unnecessary headaches for them so that they can focus on their goals. Yeah. And, every part of that ecosystem is incredibly important, and we're putting our best foot forward.
Yeah, totally. Well, cool, man. Well, thanks for joining. It's always a blast to hang out and talk and get just great insight. And so I hope it's helpful for people listening, and we'll have to, maybe it's a once a season thing. We check back in on the legal side with Nick Morgan. Got inside of it.
That sounds great, man. I appreciate the opportunity to share about this, and appreciate all you're doing on the podcast, and looking forward to talking about the next project.
Yeah, man. Sounds good. We'll talk soon. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to another week of the Feast Over Famine podcast. We are so thankful you guys are here and listening. As always, hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast listening apps. We would love to keep you guys up to date on new episodes that are coming out, when we're launching new episodes, when we're launching new seasons, and everything in between. So when we're in season, episodes are dropping every single Wednesday. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure you're up to date. Also, if you're loving what we're doing, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, where we're constantly posting about our projects, what they're doing, what kinds of things we're working on. We'll recycle some podcasts, things about our partners, all sorts of fun stuff that you want to see. So hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff, and check out what we're doing there. And yeah, we're stoked that you guys are listening. We hope this has been really fruitful, and we will catch you guys next week. And lastly, as you guys all know, we always talk about all sorts of things with impact investing, investment opportunities, entity structure modeling, how projects are getting capital. And as a disclaimer and a reminder, Feast Over Famine does not provide legal, tax, accounting, or other professional advice. You should consult professional advisors concerning the legal, tax, or accounting consequences of any activities related to your project or a project you're supporting. Feast Over Famine doesn't consult, advise, or assist with the offer or sale of securities in any capital raising transaction. We don't do that for the direct or indirect promotion or maintenance of a market for any securities. And Feast Over Famine does not engage in any activities for which an investment advisor's registration or license is required under the U.S. Investment Advisors Act of 1940 or under any other applicable federal or state law. or for which a broker's or dealer's registration or license is required under the U.S. Securities Exchange Act of 1934 or under any other applicable federal or state law. So there's your investment disclaimer. Hopefully that's helpful if you need it. And if you ever have any questions on that side of things, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Take care.